Social media and free speech. The question posed to us is this: are the measures taken by social media companies such as YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter of defunding, delisting, and deleting people's accounts merely the business decisions of privately owned companies, or do these censorship actions constitute a violation which must be corrected? The Constitution reads, Amendment 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Oxford Dictionary for abridge, law, curtail, a right or privilege. The First Amendment only provides that the Congress, government of the United States, cannot infringe upon or punish or make laws limiting the free speech or writing of Americans. It does not say that anyone can say or write anything, even in public spaces such as streets and sidewalks, without repercussions by other entities, mainly police or security guards of local businesses or even other bystanders. It is generally lawful that people may protest or speak publicly without being forcibly removed, or deliver writings or advertisement on private property such as business parking lots. But in fact, this general standard of free speech is not specifically covered by the Constitution. For example, state authorities who find a sidewalk protest distasteful might declare a protest on that side of the street a danger according to traffic regulators and force protesters to a safer location. But the safer location is remote and will not be seen or heard by a fraction of the people they reached at the former location. Given this hypothetical situation of local authorities finding a certain protest distasteful rather than actually posing a safety threat and fabricating a cause to forcibly remove the protesters, said protesters might sue the state, but in fact, said local authorities were not in violation of the First Amendment. The First Amendment only provides that the Congress cannot have a law which curtails free speech, whereas in the case of the protesters being prohibited by state authorities, the First Amendment is not a factor guaranteeing their right to make a public protest. Such a lawsuit might be effective if the case can be made that federal law is creating in this case a mandate allowing curtailment of free speech. This would be unlikely, as a mandate would come into immediate scrutiny, unless, for example, like the Patriot Act resulting from the 9/11 terrorist attack national emergency, which made legal, formerly illegal, warrantless spying on Americans. Such emergency situations can change the standards of what is acceptable behavior by the government, which can go from unacceptable to general acceptance due to the emergency, and then, once it becomes acceptable, the government can implement the measure permanently, and now America is a government surveillance state our fathers never envisioned. This has now occurred with the Patriot Act, which is now permanent. That said, it is relevant that most Americans agree the difference between the United States and other governments is that we have a law of freedom of speech, at least from government interference, even if that speech is considered extremely undesirable, dangerous, or damaging to the people. Many Americans would argue that freedom of speech is the defining attribute of America, and it is known and generally held in contempt by Americans the fact that other forms of government silence, intimidate, kill, or imprison persons who offend authorities or wealth with their speech. As I read the First Amendment, it really does not protect free speech in the manner many Americans think it does. But is the expectation of being able to speak freely not founded in actual law? Or does free speech in our Constitution mean Americans can speak or write anything they so desire, and in fact the Constitution should be updated to truly protect free speech? A primary example and cause of interest in this topic is the uproar over censorship in social media, which some listening to this might have become aware of when a sitting president of the United States, Donald Trump, was deplatformed from a major text-based social media platform, Twitter, now called X, in 2021. This was an unprecedented occurrence in American history. Those of us who have been following the social media trend of censorship know that unfounded censorship with social media has been going on for some time. I became aware of the issue in 2013 with my primary social media site, YouTube. I began to notice quality playback issues such as degraded picture quality and sound errors such as the volume periodically rising too loud, then dropping to not loud enough, making watching the video unpleasant. Then I got copyright infringement notices for using the same movie clips that many others used, which infringement notices I had to fight to keep my movies up. Then I began to notice an inconsistency in the quality of my output not matching the number of subscribers I was getting in comparison to other similar content creators on YouTube. I noticed channels with inferior quality movies regularly getting many times more views than my movies were getting. At the time, I could not be sure any of this was going on, until I observed other truth-type video makers describing the same things happening to them, even with detailed data proving their YouTube channel content was algorithmically isolated so that much fewer people would see their content. This is called shadow banning. Shadow banning is when the user of the social media account is not informed of any penalty to their channel. However, their postings are viewed much less than previously, probably by omission from normal recommendations or search results. Notice, I am aware this sounds like a paranoid conspiracy excuse for being less popular, and I believe I was reasonably hesitant to conclude this covert censorship was actually going on. But with time investigating this, I watched the testimonies of others describing the very same things, and so I knew for sure it was happening to me. Then, to my considerable dismay, I noticed some of my favorite and most informative content creators being kicked off of YouTube entirely, such as Alex Jones, Carrie Cassidy, James Corbett, Dan Dix, Ben Swan, Del Bigtree, and others, which were all intelligent, above-board, rational people, in no way inciting violence or immoral behavior whatsoever. And yet, their social media accounts, with all their great work, were summarily deleted without any recourse. Most of these creators did continue to create content, but it was much less convenient to find and view. They were effectively kicked off the national stage, in some cases universally across all major social media platforms, as the Alex Jones case famously revealed. Whoever is behind the censorship goes beyond YouTube and its management, but they were able to get Alex Jones deplatformed from Facebook, Twitter, and Apple, as well as others, and also electronic payment companies such as PayPal and GoFundMe banned him, effective to this day. I had been watching Alex Jones' content for about 6 years when this happened, and I witnessed that there was nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, that could justify such a draconian action to silence the free speech of a lawful American. I realize it is normal for anyone to think that if large companies uniformly agree to silence someone, there is probably a justified reason. I found myself thinking, really, this only happens if one does something to deserve it, and if the government and court systems approve of it to the extent their decisions are not overturned. It seems there must be some justification. But like I said, I knew the people victimized by social media censorship besides myself, and had listened to their content for years, and all of them were above board and utterly beyond reproach, such as documentarian James Corbett of the Corbett Report. I watched and was informed by his excellent documentaries for years, which did not, to my knowledge, use even a single expletive, much less anything that would be a danger to society, and yet YouTube deleted his account and all his content forever from the premier video sharing site of America. To me and many other Americans, this is truly disgusting and an outrage, and not matching the ideal for a country of free men. Americans expect we enjoy the right to speak our opinion. But now, in the age of electronic social media, we see the curtailment of free speech unprecedented in American history. As one can imagine, many have sought legal remedy, but as I mentioned, the Constitution does not actually protect free speech. The summary is that social media companies are privately owned, and thus can decide as they will what they will do with their property. If you want to stand on a sidewalk and talk to people, or pass out flyers, you are free to say whatever you want. But if you want to have a free social media account at our privately owned company, your speech is subject to our opinion, and whether it is shared by the world or not. In fact, you can even continue to say things we don't approve of, but your ability to reach others will be limited, and without informing you. This is called freedom of speech, but not reach. If the government were to decide that social media platforms had to treat their content creators with fairness and upheld the ideal of free speech, they could immediately, which raises an important point. The fact of the matter is, despite the Constitution and existing law, the government can impose its will in just about anything, right or wrong. What this experience with social media censorship has taught me is that the Constitution did not protect our country from a clever silencing of free speech. We now see silencing of free speech, including imprisonment, such as the case of journalist Julian Assange and the January 6th protest. Some of the January 6th protesters are still in prison to this day, for nothing but being at that protest rally, which was not even a riot, much less an insurrection, as the government and news media claim. Julian Assange is by all accounts an honest reporter, which academics have testified to. But because he exposed criminal action of the U.S. government, his life is ruined with imprisonment, most likely until his dying day. This reveals that the constitutional values of justice, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not the values of the modern American government, as many Americans are now realizing. But you won't hear about that because of another problem many Americans are waking up to. It turns out television and mainstream news is centrally controlled and provably scripted propaganda, right to the faces of the American people, every day and night. We who have investigated this know it includes all television and mainstream news organizations. The situation has the appearance of a vast entity of evil protecting itself from the truth. From the perspective of government, there are indeed questions of national security which, it is arguable, require some measure of intervention, primarily military, but also other considerations. No matter if the Constitution provides checks and balances, the reality is that officials in power will make authoritative decisions which affect public knowledge. For example, if a stock of military weaponry was lost, news of this getting out might lead to terrorist acquisition of those weapons. The government would need to put a gag order on the news to not publish the information. But others might argue there's more danger in covering it up. There really isn't time for a vote, so ultimately someone has to make the decision, and the nation will have to live with the consequences. Therefore, we hope our elected leaders will do what is right. But what happens when the government shows itself to be corrupt, as we can see from history is often the case? Some believe such a corrupt government is actually the case with America, and has been so across multiple administrations. Quite a few observers state that the American government has policies of murder, theft, torture, and regime change of foreign countries that did nothing to us. Neither were a threat to our national interests. Do we continue to trust our government, hoping that the mechanisms of the Constitution will eventually correct this? So far, it appears they have not, and people that have tried, like President Robert F. Kennedy, seem to die suddenly, or, like Bernie Sanders, mysteriously change their minds to agree with the establishment. What if there are forces at play using things beyond most people's ability to believe could exist, like electronic mind control, including memory erasure and implantation? And what if those in power behind the scenes are entirely beyond any sort of moral dilemma associated with achieving their aims, including world government and population control? Some have speculated a second civil war is coming, and that's one way to change a government. But without a working replacement system of government, either a revised constitution and/or something else to prevent tyranny and free speech loss from creeping in, a new government might also eventually be circumvented and information revealing this be suppressed in the name of national security. One thing a regime of evil requires to exist is hiding the truth. Otherwise, the people won't stand for it. Suppression of information is the cornerstone of an evil government. For an honest government, by the people and for the people, as was originally intended for America, an infallible law would have to be passed that all news agencies have no influence by the government or business and must not publish false information. There should also be scrutiny of news items not reported on, with a publicly enforceable viewing of available facts. In other words, regardless of who is in power in government, there is a mechanism in place which ensures that all news is honest and transparent, reporting the real facts so that the people can be properly informed. Right now in America, we have a population entirely misinformed with lies of grave consequences, being pumped out daily by corrupt news reporters who know full well they are reading from a script which contains lies and slander and omission of key facts. The entirely corrupt news reporters of America, who are allowed to continue at all in their profession, know they cannot say anything outside the script they are given, or talk about any subjects they know are forbidden, or they will be quickly fired. The news reporters of America know that if they discover information which counters a current narrative, such as a war or medical emergency, they cannot report on that information no matter how true it is, or how important it is, or they will lose their career and financial and social status. The people following the information about our current corrupt news companies know as well that any news reporters who tell the truth and go against the pushed narrative will be ruined, fired, marginalized, and slandered without mercy or forgiveness. Such is the state of the American news organizations, and the majority of the American people know it. The advent of social media requires an infallible law to ensure fairness and freedom of speech. A law must be passed ensuring that social media companies are transparent and unbiased, with immediate discovery of facts for any suspected violations, not by a committee behind closed doors, but available instantly to the public. As a suggestion, there would be a page anyone can look at showing the rankings of a social media user and rankings of their posts, including such things as how often and to whom are their postings suggested to when users are browsing for what to watch. As to the problem of postings which could pose a danger, a central definition of such dangers could be made as a publicly available definition which could be voted upon and used for immediate judgment of the censorship actions of social media companies. As the people themselves vote on this central definition of censorable content, there is no sense of a hidden hand. You may not agree with the majority, but at least you know it is the people who decide, not a corrupt government or politically motivated social media company. Video in the hands of private citizens provides another security measure for a fair situation with social media. Randomly chosen citizens could enter and record the work areas of social media companies at randomly selected times, which would make the risk of unlawful censorship much less likely. If social media companies claim they would lose proprietary information if non-company employee people enter and view their computers and devices used to control who sees what on social media, they can at that time pack up their shit and move to another country that doesn't have free speech laws and be banned from doing business in the United States, the way Facebook is banned from doing business in China. Volunteers could record video showing the facts of the case, and the public can decide by vote if the censorship action was justified or not, and the social media company would be forced to comply with the results of the public vote. As we know, things like national security or a medical emergency can be used to justify censorship. Further, we see social media companies implement rules used to justify censorship. For example, YouTube has catchphrases broadly applicable as violation terms such as hate speech or medical misinformation to censor political views and provably accurate information. YouTube deleted my videos on multiple occasions, calling them hate speech and giving me a strike in their 3 strikes and your account gets deleted policy, which also entails a 2-week suspension from uploading content, and then, to start posting again, you need to take a humiliating moral correctness quiz admitting fault and showing you understand YouTube's policy and what you did wrong. I had videos deleted which offered alternative views and solutions in medicine, which were certainly not a danger or promoting a profit-driven scam that might harm people. For instance, I posted a popular video which after 8 years and 4 million views, YouTube deleted, citing medical misinformation. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, I posted information showing the lab leak theory, which was deleted as medical misinformation. But 2 years later, most mainstream news reported that this information was likely true. There was no apology from YouTube, and no reposting of my videos, but the work I did on those videos and the information in them are lost for YouTube users forever. Furthermore, after a while, I was permanently demonetized by YouTube, which means the profit model for YouTube, which is the posting of ads on videos, which profit is shared by the content creator, was removed without appeal or remedy. This means, unlike other content creators, I cannot make a living on YouTube, which many people do. Notice herein lies another method of silencing free speech, defunding, which this defunding cannot be underestimated or brushed aside as unrelated to the issue of free speech, as it is proven that monetization significantly increases the views, as I could see on other video sharing sites such as Rumble, but in a larger sense, profitability allows for continuation and expansion for a content creator, possibly meaning existence or non-existence. It should be understood, as our founding fathers understood, that the risk of a tyrannical government coming to power is high, i.e., the constitutional right to keep and bear arms and the right to form militia. But I would point out, since I mentioned these, that what I mentioned about those in power being able to do what they want comes into play now as we see the right to keep and bear arms circumvented by laws such as California has, making the bearing of arms illegal in the city, where it is arguable you need it the most. Further, we see federal efforts to ban certain types of firearms, including everything from assault weapons to features such as rate of fire, magazine capacity, and other features, with criminalization for offenses and law enforcement showing up at people's houses for inspections, apparently after viewing their purchasing records. Notice I say this as a non-gun owner, but I still believe in the right to keep and bear arms, exactly because it was included in the Constitution to shore up against the problem of a tyrannical government. Many are of the opinion this new form of infringement on free speech with social media is an obvious sign that what our forefathers feared has now come to pass. A tyrannical, evil, permanent government has taken control of America. What has been done to squelch free speech in America is very clever, or perhaps convenient for those who want to keep evil things hidden from the knowledge of Americans. I call it censorship by convenience and fashion. Computerization and internet connectivity is a new invention now supplanting former ways of communication, such as speaking in public places and distributing written notices. The speed, reach, and convenience of social media for individual communication with the world is superior to the point that speaking in public spaces and paper distribution are both inconvenient and unfashionable, and much less effective, basically futile by comparison. For example, those who might read a flyer to get information would question the validity of the message by asking, why don't they use the internet? Perhaps they cannot handle modern technology, or maybe they have been kicked off social media for spouting dangerous views. What we have now are social media companies which are privately owned and offer use and publicity with their platforms, but they make the rules. More importantly, they decide who gets promoted and who gets isolated, and whose entire body of work and presence on these platforms gets deleted without having to disclose their decisions or answer to anyone. Most people with a sense of fairness and American values would agree that what I just described is not what America should be. But the truth is, people do not care as much about things that do not directly affect them. It is a fact that many people who have experienced harm and resulting heartbreak of losing loved ones have found out for themselves that for the crime of sharing information about what they experienced, their uploads to social media were deleted or otherwise censored by their social media company. I personally listened to the heartbreak of parents and saw their permanently crippled children right in front of me, who tried to tell their story and warn the world of what happened to them. And for this, their social media movies and account were summarily deleted, either stating they were posting misinformation or they were given no explanation at all. A growing number of Americans now know about this and the true nature of these social media companies that the government approves and indeed instructs. And the government, it appears, is making sure these social media companies go on censoring people for speaking truth that goes against their narrative. And those government narratives, as we now know, are questionable to say the least. As we now know, some of the largest social media companies were created by agencies of the U.S. government, such as Google and Facebook being creations of DARPA and the CIA. And these government military agents are well known for committing atrocities such as foreign interventionist wars to topple governments, and they kill and displace thousands of civilians to do it. It is also well documented that some, if not all, these government agencies are involved with secret society-type pedophilia and satanic ritual abuse, all of which has been documented and known for years now. Alex Jones, the alternative news reporter, was probably banned from polite society because of groundbreaking reporting exploits such as infiltration of the infamous Bohemian Grove, a secret society meeting place in California where many elites, government officials, and celebrities meet. Alex Jones managed to infiltrate the grounds of Bohemian Grove and record footage in which one can see a satanic ritual at night next to a lake and a giant stone statue of an owl. Because of those same powers having control of everything seen on television, news, most social media, and even hard print books and magazines, this reality is not known or kept in mind as much because what is allowed to be published is designed to make such truths unbelievable. While you may feel this really doesn't concern you, consider how you would feel if your child was hurt by something and then your social media company banned you for speaking out about it. Then you would care about this issue of free speech on social media. As you look upon your injured child, and then you look at the notice in your inbox that your movie that you posted about her story is taken down and shaming you for posting medical misinformation, then you would start to wake up that the word evil is not just a paranoid term for negative thinking people. Then you would understand why we need a free speech law for social media and the problem our country has. Then it would become clear the importance of a true free speech protection for what is now clearly the public forum for individual Americans to communicate with the world. I believe these dishonest censorship actions by social media to silence the views of Americans itself represents a national security risk because it creates distrust and despise of the government to the point of causing civil unrest and economic downturn. As we now see, trust in our government and the fairness of our society is at an all-time low. This social media censorship is especially ironic when now, with electronic sharing media, one is not forced to listen to the views of people shouting on the street, but one need only choose to not click on videos with views they are not interested in. But now social media companies like YouTube are hiding content that you are interested in because they do not want certain information to be spread, such as anything exposing a narrative that is being pushed by the government. As a recent example, people who posted the truth about the Ukraine war, which went against the propaganda uniformly pumped out by all television news, were censored with video and account deletions, but actually they were telling the truth, and the news media were the ones posting misinformation to their YouTube channels. One such person was a popular rising star of a YouTube talk show, The Dive with Jackson Hinkle. He was even driven into a Fox News interview with America's #1 news show host, Tucker Carlson. But Jackson, like millions of Americans, knew the anti-Russian sentiment and war propaganda of the government was a lie, and so he was talking about this on his YouTube channel. Therefore, like anyone growing in popularity who began to deviate from the establishment narrative, he was cut off, banned from YouTube and other mainstream social media, as well as from PayPal and other payment processing companies. He was essentially depersoned, cut off from the main ways people communicate with the world, and his voice cut off from the larger arena of conversation. Not long after this, that #1 news show host in America, Tucker Carlson, was fired from Fox News for absolutely no wrongdoing, but for exposing the lies and evil in the American government and big business and their secret society deep state controllers. In Tucker's case, he had such a following and financial resources that he was able to continue reporting and have a wide audience and financial backing. But what about smaller creators that get banned just for telling the truth? The fact is, their career and life that could have been is lost. Take news reporter Ben Swann, a talented up-and-coming news reporter with a known career in television news, who also started reporting on truth which went against the mainstream narrative. YouTube first massively shadow banned him, where previously he had over 200,000 views per movie, but now he was getting only 2,000 views. But he pressed on, reporting the truth about protests worldwide, which mainstream news suppressed, and other topics during the pandemic, and finally, YouTube deleted his account. I have not heard from him since. I would occasionally see Ben Swann on RT News, which is Russian news. But Russian news companies were banned from American social media and television, and further, Russian athletes were even banned from sporting events. Those with any sense who have looked at the facts know that Russia was not the aggressor in the Ukraine war, nor did they do anything wrong, but they were defending their people and their country from evil and aggressive American and NATO elements, including 30 American-funded bioweapons facilities, which the Russian military reported on and dismantled in their special military operation. And this information is widely available for anyone wanting to know the truth. But the mainstream news did not report the facts, but instead painted with lying words that Russia was the aggressor, oppressing a struggling democracy. I noticed a lot of people seem to not want to know the truth and just put a Ukrainian flag sticker on their bumper to show support for Ukraine, having been utterly duped by the lying mainstream news. How long do you think America will last if this goes on? Also notice, as I was writing this, I started to feel inexplicably sick, a loss of energy and appetite, and headaches, which I recognize as directed energy weapons used against me when they are particularly unhappy with something I am doing. I have been a targeted individual for over 10 years with air stalking and physical and psychological attacks, as millions of people worldwide now report being targeted by these covert warfare programs. They do not want people to consider the idea of a constitutional update to ensure free speech in America. The evil people behind the scenes need to control all published information, or else there will be an uprising against their agenda. Any set of laws can be circumvented given enough time, power, and corruptible individuals, especially with the ability to control information. Thus the goal is to have as much public transparency as possible and power of the public to quickly disqualify any persons or agencies with a vote. For instance, if a social media company deletes someone's movie, the public should have an immediate vote on the validity of the censorship action, based on, say, a few minutes of video and relevant facts of the case. The entire user base of the social media platform must have access to a page showing the censorship action, and those willing can review and put their vote in, with real-time, viewable results. The point is, a law requiring this would make unfounded censorship prohibitively difficult to enact. Censorship data can be gathered by investigators, and, with a certain threshold, be forced to reverse unlawful censorship of Americans by these privately owned social media companies, including revoking their license to operate. And furthermore, if a social media company is shut down for exceeding unlawful censorship, all accounts and their content must be given to a competing social media company, on pain of immediate imprisonment of all company employees, until such time as the accounts are turned over, or a minimum of 20 years imprisonment of all the social media company's employees will result. I believe a law, something like this, is what is necessary, given the outrageous shenanigans we have seen under our current laws. The fact is, and most upright Americans are aware, that social media companies have committed grave crimes of censorship, including election fraud, covering up of criminal activity, censoring true medical information, and banning fully accredited medical professionals. Meanwhile, they are pushing, promoting, and popularizing content and sources proven beyond doubt to be false. A majority of Americans have a record low opinion of mainstream news, with fake stream news being a common phrase, yet these sources are promoted by social media, showing up as first in search results, and you can imagine that not a single one of their videos is ever delisted, shadow banned, or deleted. In the end, the Constitution is only as good as the people who uphold it. It is a known commodity that, left unchecked, evil and corruption will take over anything where humans are involved, especially where there are those who have an advantage in power and the ability to use it. They will seek to gain control. That said, it is also known that the ideals of America, freedom, and a fair hand of justice to regulate disputes, has provided a flourishing of human endeavor and quality of life, the envy and standard of the world for some time. We know this was made possible by the founding document describing what America is, the Constitution, and the resulting laws passed to uphold those principles. We know that if we did not have laws and procedures in place, such as the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law, America would not be that standard, and we would not have had the wealth, success, and quality of life that we have had. The Constitution and the resulting law of the land was specifically designed to prevent certain problems known to have existed, such as the problem of a king imposing taxation without representation. We broke away from Britain and created our own country exactly because of this problem. Therefore now, because another crisis of government has arisen, and the existence of our country is in peril, there is a call to ratify the Constitution and our laws to address these problems. The summary is this: it is now clear those with evil intent, whose designs are known to be against what the American people want, have taken control of the devices of public information so as to continue their agenda without the knowledge of the American people. But we see the people cannot be made fully aware of this because all means of mass communication are under control, and those behind this control silence, slander, criminalize, defund, and deperson anyone exposing this tyranny. Therefore, this information control must be abolished, requiring a change to the Constitution. It must no longer be possible for any entities to control the information in any medium or platform of mass communication, regardless of its private ownership. The Constitution must include or make impossible to not exist an infallible assurance of anyone using a medium of mass communication the freedom to express their opinions without repercussion by any instrument of mass communication, including deletion, suppression, marginalization, or defunding of any kind, and due to the differences of opinion of what constitutes an unacceptable danger to society, which could also be used to silence inconvenient views. A government entity is required by law to manage full transparency and democratic process for continual public evaluation of an agreed charter of unacceptable communication, as well as public scrutiny and ability to vote on individual cases of censorship with immediate and enforceable results of voting on a case. It is arguable that something the framers of our Constitution did not foresee has arisen with the inventions of computerization and the World Wide Web, making previous forms of information dispersal and access obsolete, but also presenting new opportunities for the abuse of power, mainly as it regards the control of the computerized devices and flow of information on the Internet. The evidence of such abuse of power is unfounded censorship of lawful Americans and lawful speech, and the promotion of lies and known disseminators of false information, which are nonetheless profitable and supported by corrupted justice officials. The Constitution and resulting mandatory law must be updated to prevent this abuse of power by any organization, public or private, with transparent and quickly effective democratic mechanisms to enforce this right of all Americans to the free expression of their opinion, without being hindered in any way by their communication platform, the government, or any other entity. The decider of who sees or hears what on any information device, platform, or network must rest in the user of said device, platform, or network, and no one else, even at the cost of harm which may result from some communications. As to censorship exceptions for national emergencies or national security, because of the known risk of the abuse of power under these circumstances, we the American people deem the danger of abuse using emergencies or national security a greater risk to the well-being of America than to allow the government to decide this on its own. We have seen the abuse of power in the government under the auspices of national security with the Patriot Act making legal warrantless search and previously illegal surveillance. We have seen national emergencies used to suppress information later proven to be true, and suppression of a vast sector of medical professionals worldwide in the cover-up of life and death information thereby. The framers of the Constitution knew, trusting the government is not a plan. It should be considered that information being known by the public is rarely damaging to the country, but is most likely damaging to those in the government or special interests. The dangers of information suppression outweigh the need for secrecy. The American people have decided historically in favor of free-flowing information, which is freedom of speech and freedom to hear. It is time then for the people to vote to sign it into law, specifically as it regards the new technology of computerization and World Wide Web information sharing and access. It is established, long before America existed, that those with evil intent always attempt to gain power and control over others, and suppress information about what they do. If those of evil intent succeed and gain control of the government, degradation of the nation will result. It is up to the men living in their time to uphold the freedom of the nation. If the nation falls into ruin, it will be on our heads, the men of our time, for allowing it to happen. The state of affairs regarding the suppression of free speech, as I have described here, have been known and proven for some time, though those adhering to, and indeed can even stand to watch television and its fake news narrative, will choose to remain ignorant of it. The technology of computers, internet, and privately owned but government-controlled social media are a violation to the spirit of the American aspiration to live in a free country, where a man can express his reasonable opinion and not by technical means be silenced or punished for views contrary to some established narrative. America is already divided between those who believe this cancel culture is un-American and intolerable, and those who agree with the government and big tech collusion of the suppression of unwanted opinions. Let's look at the founding document of our country again and what it says on this matter. Amendment 1. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. By agreeing with the suppression of certain people's undesirable or dangerous views by government and social media, one would also have to agree that an amendment or ratification to the Constitution would have to be made in order to counter the wording that the government shall pass no law abridging free speech. For example, a text additive would have to describe that in the age of instant worldwide communication, government and big tech must cooperate to stop certain communications, for instance, dangerous ideologies which might spawn terrorism, or hate speech which might result in discrimination against some groups. Therefore, a charter must be created defining what constitutes dangerous ideology and hate speech, and herein lies the problem. Who decides what is dangerous or otherwise acceptable communication? What defines dangerous and unacceptable is subject to vast variance of opinion. Some things are more easily agreed upon, such as pornography or other adult content, but things like hate speech, ideology or religion, and politics vary widely. We have seen people isolated and banned by social media for political views, or hate speech, or misinformation, but this was done by the opinion of the ones in power to control communication, the social media companies. But to the people who were censored, their posts were not dangerous, unacceptable, hate speech, or misinformation, or disinformation. They would argue their views are reasonable expressions of opinion, which by no means deserve to be silenced from public discourse. The Constitution, which the law of the land is based on, cannot be so specific so as to define by punitive law what constitutes dangerous views that need to be silenced by a technical arbiter. The Constitution, therefore, is somewhat a guiding charter for some issues like free speech, while being more specific on other matters of the structure of governance. Thus, each state of the United States must decide its defining laws, but the laws of America should adhere to and not conflict with the Constitution. Therefore, in a situation where opinions may vary widely, the remaining principle of free speech as is present in the Constitution must be upheld. This matter is interesting exactly because of the difficult aspect of finding common agreement where free speech is protected, but limitations still apply even in the most ideal situations imaginable. For instance, we understand yelling fire in a theater or pornography in a general social media environment cannot be allowed, but those in favor of curtailing free speech in less agreed upon topics might argue that if America should truly be a free speech absolutist nation, then the law must protect the free speech of minor attracted persons and terrorist activists. They might then exploit such a situation if a free speech law on social media were to pass by flooding social media with the utmost heinous material until an outcry for censorship is made. Further, social media companies might argue their user base would be turned away if all views were protected free speech. Therefore, minimizing some while promoting others is necessary for profit. An argument can be made pointing to things like the prohibition of prostitution and narcotic drugs being immediately noticeable in the lack thereof, with visible societal downturn. But others believe it is authoritarian and not a free country if people cannot be free to purchase what they will and make any consensual agreement between adults they desire. Those we might call cancel culture supporters might say if we allow far-right views or views questioning establishment narratives on sensitive health or war topics, then you would have a similar societal downturn as when you make gambling, prostitution, and drugs legal. It's just common sense that some views have to be throttled or eliminated for the greater good. But who decides on matters where there is no commonly understood result? And is it fair if a social media company occupies the primary position of a sharing type, like movies for YouTube or text for Twitter, and the owners of those companies get to decide what is marginalized and what is promoted, and this amounts to those company owners being the arbiters of speech? And what if it is well known that most large social media platforms have a certain leaning for a political party and against another political party? Is the value of free speech for the American people upheld, or has America slidden into a techno-tyranny? It is entirely clear to the political party getting the short end of the stick that America has indeed slidden into a techno-tyranny. Those who disagree with the establishment guidelines on things related to the pandemic, even just sharing that their children were hurt or they learned an important truth that people should know, are aware that we have slidden into a techno-tyranny, and surely the value of free speech our founding fathers wrote into the Constitution are not present in America now. The question is, what are those in America who know this is going on going to do about it? When the powers that be can and do silence, minimize, and destroy people socially and financially who even talk about this issue on the main way people can share information, social media. What if, as is actually plainly observable, there appears to be a collusion of liberals and those in favor of cancel culture in the very government of the United States, mainstream news, big tech social media, and they use this trifecta of power and information control to literally rule the nation, rewarding those that agree with them while punishing those who disagree, and that those in that trifecta of power and information control believe they are in the right, and dissenters are dangerous and bad people that need to be marginalized? But of course, those dissenters do not see it that way, but see it as a vast unfairness against them. What do we do then? It seems to me that as long as people have a different idea of what constitutes right and wrong, there will be conflict. In other words, if there was a single, unquestionable source to define right and wrong, such as God, the problem of conflict between people and nations might largely be solved. In the current situation, where at best you have people of good intentions but widely diverging ideas about right and wrong, and at worst you have people of evil intent who use right and wrong as a shield to hide their evil deeds and shame and silence anyone who speaks the truth, the solution in a democracy is a transparent vote by all the people, not just a few behind closed doors. The situation must also clearly be understood that big tech social media companies do indeed have a monopolistic hold on certain spaces where Americans must now go to get or share certain types of information, such as movies for YouTube and text for Twitter, and the elements that makes these companies dominant in those spaces are prohibitively difficult to create competing platforms against. Therefore, it is not a situation where if one does not like the rules of one social media company, one can easily switch to another. If one could easily switch social media companies, billionaire capitalist Elon Musk would not have paid $40 billion for Twitter, and people who are in favor of the previous owner's cancel culture would not have stayed at Twitter when Elon Musk announced banishment of those censorship policies. YouTube holds the space for video, especially full-length video, with a technical advantage over any other competing company and existing user base, to where, despite there being numerous competing companies, sharing on them or searching for content on them is futile by comparison. For instance, I decided to diversify my publication to as many free-to-use social media platforms as I could find, mainly BitChute, Brighteon, and Rumble. But the resulting views for my content is less than a fifth of my views on YouTube, and for types of information to be found in full-length movies, I still go to YouTube, though I wish there was an alternative. Many Americans, and much more foreigners, have never heard of these smaller movie platforms, and could not imagine, unless you were censored, why you would go anywhere else. Also, if one tries these other smaller movie platforms, you will notice an unpleasant, lesser technical competence to the platform itself, like speed, convenience, and reliability, further cementing YouTube as the almost exclusive go-to place for video sharing and watching. If only it did not have that ruinous censorship. Therefore, the argument that big tech social media companies might make that free speech is not in jeopardy because if you don't like the conditions of one company, you can just switch to another. The laws against a monopoly should apply here, especially since the free speech of Americans is at stake. By cutting off people's ability to talk about a conspiracy or evil of some kind, you actually fan the flames of belief in it, and we know eventually people find out. And when they do realize a truth was hidden by censorship, the people will include those who conducted the censorship in the blame for what evil was done. I have no doubt that the people who work at YouTube and other pro-cancel culture information sharing platforms know full well what they are doing is wrong, and think that probably no one will find them out or be able to enact justice upon them. But no, God has every one of these souls marked according to their deeds. Proverbs 15:3. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the good and the evil. I also have no doubt that there will be a visible reckoning and accounting before all the people that were unfairly censored and those who censored them. Meanwhile, it has integrity to pursue justice and fairness for all, according to the American constitutional value of free speech. What gets censored on social media must be democratized with a transparent vote on a charter of exactly what constitutes unacceptable communication, and a transparent vote on individual disputed postings with immediate and effective consequences for social media companies which violate the law. Thank you for listening. I'm Richard Bruce.